This is the Mitakon 65mm f1.4, specifically made for medium format cameras like the Hasselblad X2D, the 907x, and the Fujifilm GFX series. Not only is it relatively affordable, but it gives you the most like medium format Pentax 6.7 kind of look in terms of depth of field of any lens that I have ever used. So let's talk about how it works in practice on a medium format camera like these. I'll share plenty of image samples and my thoughts on whether or not you should consider picking one up for your system. So the GFX one is my copy. I purchased it with my own money when I first purchased my GFX, and it's pretty much been the only lens that I've used on that system ever since I purchased the GFX. And then when I got the 907X in, I sent these guys an email just saying, hey, I really love this lens, would love to check it out on the XCD mount. And they were gracious enough to send it over to me for the sake of this review. So I do get to keep this lens, but the other one I purchased with my own money. So the reason why I have two of the same lens on the table. Now, the reason behind wanting a lens like this is 65mm equates to about a 50mm field of view on a 35mm camera. So that gives you a normal kind of field of view. And then pairing that normal field of view with a 1.4 aperture on a medium format camera gives you the kind of equivalent of like a 50mm 0.95 lens, something in that realm. Now, they also call this lens the Speedmaster, and obviously that is just because the depth of field you're getting out of this is incredibly shallow and can give you some very, very beautiful, dreamy kind of images. Now, like I said, beautiful and dreamy. So there are really, really amazing parts about this. The out of focus elements and the subject separation are incredible. But when you miss focus on this thing, you can definitely just, it just does not look good. I mean, it doesn't look good anytime you miss focus on something, but combining the incredibly shallow depth of field with the fact that it's kind of harder to gain perfect focus on a lens like this because the depth of field is so shallow, and it's just not the sharpest lens in the world at 1.4. It's definitely usable, and I've used it obviously for years now to make some really beautiful images, but especially when you're looking at it on 100 megapixels or even 50 megapixels, you're definitely seeing the fact that it's a little on the soft side for sure. Now, all that being said, for things like portraits, for things like weddings, obviously, having something that's a little softer and a little dreamier, has a little bit more glow to it, can be a really good thing. I find that the subject separation and, again, the bokeh on this thing is just beautiful. It's something that is very editorial, like magazine worthy in terms of at least like the wedding space. The field of view being around 50mm, but in that 4x3 kind of more traditional 6:4:5 format just lends itself so well, especially again in like the like wedding kind of editorial world, to just having such a beautiful fall off of the image. But not only in a kind of wedding situation, I just love how much it reminds me of either like the Contax 645 with the Zeiss 80mm f2, the Mamiya 645 with the 80mm 1.9 that I used to own, as well as the Pentax 6.7 with the 105 2.4. I feel like all those lenses kind of give off a fairly similar feel to this one as well, because you're getting the compression, but also the kind of like environment around the subject while still having that incredible depth of field. And then pairing this on a sensor that has just what feels like a lot more color fidelity, a lot more dynamic range than a typical 35mm sensor is just something that makes this particular thing just so special looking. Now, I'll definitely say that this lens does work better on a Fujifilm camera than it does on a Hasselblad camera. The main thing about that being that these things have an actual mechanical shutter in them, while the Hasselblad ones rely on a leaf shutter in the lens, something that this lens does not provide. But in the X2D and the 907X CFV 100C, they have a 14-bit mode that doesn't give you obviously as much color depth, but it reads out the sensor much, much, much faster. And I found for non-moving subjects, for still life, but also for portraits, things like that, that you're not having a lot of movement going on, It is definitely fast enough to use it on this system. I found it a little bit more difficult to use it on some of the older ones or in 16-bit mode, where I definitely did adapt lenses to that original sensor, but the readout was just a little bit too slow for me to feel confident in using it. But again, in the latest iterations of the 907X 100C and the X2D, if you use it in 14-bit mode, it reads out the sensor fast enough that as long as, again, there's not too much movement going on, I feel like it's definitely worthwhile. And for the things that I use this for, especially being things like portraits, full body portraits, details, things like that, it works fantastic. Now, outside of image quality, something also you're going to want to know is this thing is heavy. It weighs over 1,000 grams and it's pretty compact in that it's not one of those things that's like a longer lens, like a 70-200 where it's more evenly distributed. It is just bulky. It's something that, while yes, it feels okay on larger camera lenses like this, it's definitely very, very heavy. One thing that I've seen some people complain about, wishing that this lens had a lens hood, it does. On the front, it has the lens hood. And I really like the fact that if you need it, it comes right off the front and you're able to put it on there. And this lens definitely has a unique lens flare. Some of it is beautiful and really cool. And then sometimes it's hard to see through all that kind of stuff. So I've definitely used my hand to cover the lens or have put the lens hood on at times while shooting weddings. But I will say that flare actually is something that I do think is really, really cool on this lens. And now, other than the size and weight, my biggest gripe on this lens is just the fact that the aperture ring here isn't clicked. I have no idea why it's not clicked. So there was even a point in time where I gaff taped my lens to just be at 1.4 because I was shooting it at weddings and things, and I would find that it was at like 1.7 or 2.4 or something like that. And it's not like it's that big of a deal, but at times when it's stopped down a little bit, you can tell in the out of focus elements when the lens gets stopped down if it doesn't have a ton of aperture blades, which is something that I ran into on this lens. It can't be that hard. Every lens has clicked apertures, so I don't know why they don't do that, but it is a thing that persists to our current day. So this is a newer copy of the same lens. This is a lens I've had for years now, and both of them do not have clicked aperture rings. So definitely a bummer, but it is what it is. Now, also in terms of just the image circle that it produces, it absolutely fills the entire frame. You're going to get some vignetting just because you're shooting wide open and things, but it definitely fills the frame. No problem. I don't get any weird shift in focus as I go towards the edges. I don't get any hard stops, anything like that. It just fills the frame incredibly well. So if you do have a medium format camera and you haven't tried a lens like this before, it's definitely something that is a little bit more difficult to use because you're using such a shallow depth of field, but I just love the images that come out of it. It's one of those things where almost every time I've used my GFX or the 907X here with this lens, that it just gives you that wow factor. It gives you, when I was using the GFX a lot, most of the photos I was posting on my Instagram from weddings were from this combination. And it's just because that pop and that subject separation, while still getting a decent amount of context of the environment around it, just gives you that very like medium format-y look and feel to things. And honestly, especially at the price that I've seen it at often at, I think the reduced price is often around $600. It's definitely just something you should try out if you have a camera that could adapt to something like this. Although if you put links in the description down below to the sites where you can pick this up if you're interested, I definitely think you should try it out. So thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. And then if you want to see more about the 907X, you can see it in this video. Check out my video on the GFX 50S here, as almost all the images were taken with this, and I'll see you in one of those videos.